law degree too then?
Yeah, I need to take that off of there so people stop talking about it.
So we can't make any jokes, no lawyers.
No,
And lead GA, which is great. He's a consultant, speaker, writer, producer. I know he's a father, husband, homeowner, and Thrive Net Zero Consulting, Greennovation TV.
those are among the many things that I do. Yeah.
Awesome. And I'm going to read his bio here, and I know his email address is up there as well. Matt was awarded the 2012 Michigan Green Leader by the Detroit Free Press and has been called one of the Greater Detroit's most progressive personalities, and you'll see why in a few minutes. He is a net zero energy and building performance consultant. He's co-founder of Mission Zero Fest, which some of you know about already, and a nationally renowned advocate and authority on net zero energy building design and retrofits. Matt is host of Innovation TV, a contributor to the Environment Report on public radio. He's contributor to Fox 2 Morning Show's Energy Team and the Green Renovation Expert for Old House Web. Matt has a Mission Zero goal to eliminate the negative environmental impact of every building in America. He is a sought-after lecturer and a frequent source of journalists on the topic of net zero energy, green buildings, historic preservation, and energy performance. His home was selected as one of USA Today's best green homes of 2010, and The Atlantic called it sustainable perfection. It is America's oldest and Michigan's first net zero energy home, meaning it annually produces more energy than his family consumes. He has been featured in the pages and on the airwaves of nearly 100 media outlets, including several others. He now drives a Chevy Bolt, which is plugged into our new station, which he was very excited to have.
I put it in the presentation. I took a picture with my phone and put it in here.
Powered by the sun. So without any further introduction, I'm going to introduce Matt, and I think he has something to tell you just to start off his presentation. But one more thing, we hope that many of you can come to Muskegon next Friday because you'll be doing a TED show there. So please welcome Matt.
You want to tell him about my daughter, or shall I tell him?
You should tell him about it.
And no, I was telling how do you say your name? Philza. I was telling Philza earlier that my daughter's 3 going on 4, and she has the great privilege of, she will never know what it's like to live in a carbon emitting home. So this is a little tiny human being who's on planet Earth today, who lives in a home that, and for the rest of her life, she's never going to drive a car that uses gasoline. She's never going to live in a home that emits carbon. And that's pretty damn cool. So we're kind of proving what's extraordinarily possible here. I went out for a jog the other day, and I was listening to Brief History of Time, because it's what I do, is listen to things about quantum physics while I'm jogging. It's not true. It's the first time. There was this quote that Stephen Hawking had mentioned that from Albert Einstein. He said that politics is for the present, but an equation is for eternity. And that really kind of got me thinking about a lot of the stuff that we talk about here, because every time I mention the idea that we can actually destroy the planet from the comfort of our own home, it becomes a political question. And it shouldn't be. My friend Henry Pollack, who's a physicist and shared the Nobel Prize with Al Gore and the climate team at the UN, wrote that ice is really the best indicator, because ice doesn't carry any political baggage, doesn't even vote, it just melts. So it's these equations that are really important, and the numbers. And this is what Bill McKibben says is the most important number on planet Earth, 350. Do y'all know, just raise your hands if you have any idea why 350 is a significant number. Have you all heard of what this is? This is the most important number on Earth. And what this number is James Hansen and a number of climate scientists got together to try to determine what is the level of carbon concentration in our atmosphere, that above which our climate, which humanity and wildlife and all of the rest of the biosphere adapted, Above that number, could we still survive if it stayed there for any extended period of time? I want you to remember that number. We'll come back to that. This is what I consider the second most important number. And the reason is because this is the number that we must pay attention to every day in our daily lives. This is the number that my daughter in her lifetime must achieve, which is zero emissions. Our carbon in our car, in our homes. And the exciting thing is that this is not about sacrifice. It's not about bathing in your pasta water. It's not about going back to the dark ages. In fact, what we're going to talk about today is going back and seeing what my home, 112-year-old home, that's been written over in hundreds of publications. I stopped adding to this months and months and months ago. Magazines, news shows, people really excited to come and see our house. But why? So this is a story of our little house. Now it's turning 112 years old next year. It's in Ann Arbor, Michigan. It is the first house that has been documented to be net zero energy in Michigan, and it is the oldest so far. I hope we don't keep this title for long. It is the oldest home in North America to have achieved net zero energy. So we've proven something quite extraordinary, that you can take an old house and in fact eliminate its negative impact on the earth. This is the house that my wife and I jogged by one day and said, that is our dream house. It had everything you wanted. Asbestos siding, it had zero insulation in the attic, which is not entirely true because there was a layer of newspaper dated 1902 that was laid down on the attic. It had lead paint. It had windows that were completely sealed shut. Where were they? Oh, go back. These windows were completely sealed shut. It had, you could actually stick an entire knife down inside those windows, sometimes a spoon. It had, carpeting downstairs. It had a refrigerator from 1989, I think it was. It had a toilet that flushed about 5 gallons of water every time you flushed. It had pink Formica faux marble in the bathroom and on the sink, and wonderful pink towels there too. It had faucets that were running at 2.5 gallons per minute. We had a furnace in the basement that was a Mueller Climatrol from 1957. That thing would have never died. Why would we replace such a thing? It's never going to die. Well, we'll learn more about that in just a minute. So this is what I talk about, I call energy ball. Is anybody familiar with the baseball fans? No? You familiar with the movie Moneyball? Have you all seen this? Moneyball is about the 2002 Oakland A's. The Oakland A's were the worst paid team in all of baseball. They had no money to work with. And yet they performed better than any other team. That year, in 2002, they lost several of their best players, and they had to replace them either through trades or bringing up rookies. And in that year, when they lost, they made the playoffs the year before. They had 3 All-Stars that they had to get rid of because they became free agents. And by the end of the 2002 season, they had won 20 consecutive games. It was a record in all of baseball. Nobody had ever performed this well. And yet, they had the lowest payroll in all of baseball. So how did they do this? So for years, baseball had been looking at data, at statistics, at numbers, at the wrong equations, really. They were looking at things like stolen bases and RBI and batting average, and everyone gets really excited, and we created fantasy league baseball teams all around these box scores. And no one ever stopped the question, do these things indicate better performance? If I have a better stolen base average, or if I have a better batting average, does that help the team win? And isn't that the point? We have all these wonderful statistics, and nobody really asked the question. And then the most surprising thing about all this is that if you Google things like base on balls, which is, this thing isn't working anymore, it's amazing the kind of images that you come up with. So base on balls and on-base percentage turned out to be better performance indicators, but nobody was measuring those things. And if they were measuring it, it was just hidden somewhere that nobody really talked about until some fantasy league baseballer started looking at some of this data. And then the Oakland A's looked at this data and said, wait a minute. If a guy is getting on base, I don't care if he's hitting the ball to center field or if he's walking. Turns out, the guys who know when not to swing at a pitch, they're getting on base more often because they can hit the ball, but they don't strike out, and they can get on base. Much better performance indicator. So if you look at how what this trend ended up being, you can see actually this is kind of fun because the Detroit is down there at the bottom, very poorly paid, very poorly performing. It's easy to build a bad house that performs poorly. Up there at the top, you see the Oakland A's, the lowest paid team, the third highest performing in that year in 2001 and 2002. Now, in architecture and in building and in all of these USGBC meetings that we go to, we look at wonderful box scores, right? We look at people brag about, oh my gosh, you should hear about the R value that I've got in my walls. You should hear about the U factor in my windows. I've got a HERS rating of 37. And who cares? These are all valuable numbers, but they're guides. They are not targets. So when you guys are working on the solar decathlon, your target is not to get the best performing window or the best performing walls or roof or even the best performing solar panel. Your target is to get to 100% sustainability on that site, zero energy. That's your goal. Everything else that you use, all the other math that you do is all guides. In our house, we got a HERS rating of 37. And to this day, people are like, wow, 112-year-old house and you got a HERS rating of 37? It's like, but you're missing the point. This is actually our performance. I don't care about that number. That's a number that's just after the fact that we plug into this computer that's not measuring the thing. So somewhere between this number, 37, and this number, 0, is how we get to net zero energy. This is what people are missing. Because there's plenty of homes. Neighbor up the street has a LEED Platinum home. It's up for sale if y'all would like to buy it for $750,000. He's got a HERS rating of 43. It's really impressive, and it's a 3,500 square foot house. But where do we get from 43 or 37 down to 0? LEED is not measuring that. HERS is not measuring that. You can't put bamboo seats in a Hummer and call it green. So we have to have vision when we look at these things. We have to understand the psychology of the end game. So whether it's a solar decathlon or anything else, you have to know where are you going. Whether it's a net zero campus here on Lawrence Tech, one thing I can guarantee you, that if you don't say you're going to go to net zero, you will not go to net zero. But if you say now and you pick a date by 2020, I like that date, 25, in 2025, that Lawrence Tech will be a net zero campus. It is possible, the technology exists. If we had to do it or shut down the university by next week, we could make it happen in a week. All the technology is there to harvest your own energy here. Oddly enough, it would be more difficult to become net zero water and net zero waste than it would be net zero energy. But net zero energy we could do in 7 days if we just called in a bunch of contractors and put in solar panels, changed out these lights, took that hallway that's lit with all of these lights as we speak, and it's right next to 100 feet of glass windows. Oh, what other kind are there? But windows. And they're not on any kind of rheostat or timer or anything or light sensor. So for a couple $100, you could wire this building with a couple of cheap sensors and eliminate that energy. So this is incredibly crucial. So the result of that 350 number was that stabilizing atmospheric CO2 in climate requires that net CO2 emissions approach 0. 0. And that's our target. So for our house, we buy this it was about 109 years old at the time, I think, is that what it was? And we decided we were going to set a Mission Zero for our house. There was a company in Atlanta, Georgia called Interface that decided that they were going to be net zero everything, water, waste, energy, by the year 2020. This was in 1994. By the time we bought our house, they were more than halfway to that goal, and they are on target to achieve that, what they call their mission zero, by the year 2020. I said, if they can do that with that, why can't we do it with a home? If you can do it with a multinational global corporation, then we can do that with our home. So I say that all homes by 2030 should be supplied with 100% renewable energy and harvest their own water. They should create zero waste. And they should create a living space that not only sustains the environment, because that's just paying your bills, but actually is restorative to the environment, because we've got 250 years of damage that we've got to make up for. And I've talked to a lot of groups, and this looks like a pretty radical thing, right? Zero? And we shouldn't call it net zero energy, by the way. We really should be calling it net zero carbon. And maybe that's something we'll talk about if we ever do a project together. We'll talk about it as net zero carbon, not net zero energy, because the sun is the greatest nuclear power plant we've got. So this radical concept, because of Interface Carpets in Atlanta, has been adopted by this small business out of Arkansas, a little local company there called Walmart. If y'all are familiar, Walmart? Yeah, so here, this is from the Walmart website. The Walmart's working to be supplied by 100% renewable energy, create zero waste, and sell only sustainable products. That's on their website. So they are setting the ideal as the indicator of success. And that's what we have to do with all of these homes. And so how do you get there, right? We know that if we just had this list of things, we could go through Lawrence Tech and figure out how to make it net zero energy by the end of the week. But is that really possible? There's financial constraints, there's everything else, there's cooperation, there's collaboration, there's all these things that have to happen. You can get the best architects, best engineers in the world, and I've seen this happen, working on a home or a building, and they still don't achieve net zero energy. So what are they doing wrong? These are smart people. Well, there's this orange parable about these two daughters, right? They're screaming, they're fighting over the last orange in the house. And they each want to do something really special with it. And the mother just gets so frustrated and said, forget it. Where I'm cutting the orange in half, you're getting half, you're getting half. And they go off in their little corners, and one girl scoops out the inside of the orange and boils up the rind and makes marmalade, throws away the pulp. And the other girl goes and squeezes the orange and makes orange juice. And if the two had only talked to each other, they'd had twice the orange juice and twice the marmalade, would have enjoyed breakfast. So this is, I don't know why it's going so slow. So this is our house. That is Elizabeth and Philip Gauss in 1913. So about 13 years after the house was built. That was their first son, Robert. That's our house. It looks pretty much exactly like that now. So and there's Elizabeth back in the backyard. You can see the chimney from our house back there. You can see the original power lines coming back there. That was nothing but coal that would belch out of that chimney up top. There's some grapevines, and there's their solar clothes dryer right behind her. It was a high-tech device at the time. That's 7th Street, right across, right in front of our house. Those hydrangeas are still there in our yard. This is the Grizzly Peak Brewing Company now, this building. Right up the street from where we live, right in downtown Ann Arbor. A couple years after this photograph was taken, that was the Philip Gauss Saloon. So the owner of our home had a little saloon there. But the reason this is significant was because this was the day that my neighborhood was getting electricity for the first time in human history. So, and about that time, they were using about 79 kilowatts of energy per year. So now, everyone says that old houses are the greenest houses. There's a whole report out from the National Preservation Historic Trust making that claim. And there's a lot to be said for that. It is partially true. And Wendell Berry said, when going back makes sense, you move forward. So let's take a look back, because if they really are, and we lived in this wonderful idyllic time, houses recognize the patterns of nature and everything else. But I call this the myth of the noble house. But first, let's take a look at what they did right. This is our backyard. So that is Robert, by the way. There's a little lilac tree that's still growing in our backyard. There's the chicken coop. There's the little dog house that was their pet, who actually had a function, was out there just like Fido in the cartoons to guard the chicken coop from the foxes that wandered around in my neighborhood. because nature and humans integrated and lived together, and you balance those needs. There's the composting toilet right there, the outhouse. Probably not the best thing. They would have had chamber pots underneath their beds, and they managed all of their own waste on site. It's wonderful. I'm not sure I'd want to go outside to do that in winter in Michigan, but there's a cistern right over here, just behind Robert, where they would capture their own rainwater. There's a garden right over here where they would harvest a lot of their own food. There's a freshwater drinking well where the 5 or so gallons of water a day that they needed to drink, that needed to be potable, was pumped from. Everything else, laundry and gardening and even boiling, came from the cistern that was landed on their cedar roof that wasn't treated with chemicals. They had chickens and rabbits that they used for meat and eggs. Not eggs from the rabbits. Rabbit eggs I recommend them. They had natural ventilation throughout the house. The house itself was designed to recognize the patterns of nature, because if you wanted to stay cool in the house, you had to know which way the sun was pointing and stop that sun from beating down on the house beforehand. But the house also burned about 1,200 pounds of coal every month, to heat a house in Michigan. Straight up the chimney, no filter, nothing. And again, that wasn't coal from Michigan. This was shipped up here on a train, using even more coal, put into fireplaces that they had to shovel out 100 pounds of ash every month. So this was not convenient, not comfortable, and more polluting than our technologies today. So this is why it's the myth of the noble house. And their waste, sure, they were taking their poop and they were putting it into the ground outside, and it was self-composting, and every year they would move the compost somewhere else. They would move the outhouse somewhere else. But the rest of their waste, the shoes that you saw that Elizabeth Gauth were in, were leather shoes, also sustainable, right? From a local cow somewhere probably, harvested right nearby, brought over on a horse cart, tanned in the local tannery right downtown in Ann Arbor, and cobbled into shoes. Really sustainable, but it was also cobbled into shoes with all kinds of heavy metals and everything else, and all the waste from the breweries and the tanneries and every other manufacturing plant in downtown Ann Arbor went into Allen's Creek. Allen's Creek is the reason Ann Arbor exists. It was this water supply where you can get fresh water, and it would go out and be cleaned again when it went out to the Huron River. But the problem is that it became an open sewer. And that's the way they did it. And then we got smarter. We figured out all these wonderful ways to re-engineer things. So we said, well, let's just turn it into a real sewer. We can make a concrete pipe, and we can just bury the thing under the ground. In the 1920s, that's exactly what they did. They buried Allen Creek, and to this day, it runs right next door to my house. This is actually just around the corner where Allen Creek flowed through under Washington Street, and it's still there. And my daughter's never seen it. I've never seen it. Anybody that's born after 1928 has never seen Allen's Creek. You can hear it if you listen inside the storm drains when you cross the roadways. So there are a handful of people who know that it is running beneath their feet. Before that, we were burning about 15 to 20 cords of wood a year. Now think about this. Now, humans are the only species on Earth that burn anything. And so 15 to 20 cords of wood. This number's wrong, but it's a big pile. It's bigger than that. I think it's 80 by 80 by. I'll have to figure it out. I have to go back and redo these numbers. But it's an extraordinary amount of wood. So what that means is that in 1800, where writers and naturalists were writing about the inexhaustible pine forests in Michigan, inexhaustible was the word they used. That early explorers said that the myth was that a squirrel could dance along the canopy from the Upper Peninsula all the way down to northern Florida without ever touching the ground. That's how dense the forests were in North America. But by 1890, this is Hermanville, Michigan. Michigan had lost 95% of its forest cover. In less than 100 years. In less than 100 years. I remember Ann Arbor was founded in 1830 or 1834, I believe. So in less than 100 years, we destroyed virtually all the forests in Michigan. before the Industrial Revolution really kicked in, just to cook and to heat and to build a few buildings. But most of it we were sending straight up into the atmosphere. Now lighting was a whole other thing. We used all kinds of different sources. There was whale oil, but it actually wasn't the most popular because it was the most expensive. But people used lard. There were actually lighting stores, oil stores, where you could go in and you could purchase lard, kerosene, whale oil, whatever kind of oil, anything that would burn, they had it. And it was all different price levels. Candles. So somebody had mentioned to me that, we could just go back and we could all live in yurts. It was actually a really young farmer, and so I looked at him. I said, "How are we going to heat 130 million yurts in America? How are all the people in Michigan, if we all abandoned our waste homes and we just moved to a tent out in the woods, how would we stay warm? We can't go back to burning forests. There's not even enough for the current supply of people, much less the future supply of people. Lighting itself." Let's go back to candles, right? Well, this is every year they have this dark night or whatever it's called, the Earth Hour, where we turn out the lights for 1 hour, just kind of show the world how much energy we consume. And one of the things to do is you sit around with your friends and play cards and light candles. Well, guess what? For the same amount of lumens, a paraffin candle burns 10 times the CO2 as an incandescent light bulb per lumen. 10 times. So it's actually the most inefficient because most of it is heat. It's not light. Then there's a little whale oil lamp over there, the incandescent light bulb, and about 100 years later we start using compact fluorescent lights, and then we evolve into the LED light where we are now. So in 1901 we're using about 79 kilowatt hours of electricity per household. By 1930, 1929, we're more than 10 times that. We're up to 960 kilowatt hours a year. 2010, we're at almost 14,000 kilowatt hours a year of electricity per household. Just to give you an idea, so this is the population right here in 1901. So this is the population now. So multiply all those light bulbs and Xboxes and Wiis and everything else around the world, and this is what it looks like at night. And you can see how fair the distribution of this energy is, too, right? Where are the dark places? They're in the poorest parts of the world. So it is not the dirty and polluting poor nations of the earth that are polluting the planet. It is us. The average Tanzanian will use less energy in a year than a single American will from the time the clock strikes midnight on New Year's Eve until he wakes up from his hangover and has dinner the next night. So in 24 hours, an American will use more energy than a Tanzanian will use in a year. So this is the impact of all of this. Of the total energy consumed on planet Earth from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, roughly around 1751 to 2010, half of that energy has been consumed since 1990. All right, since the first George Bush was president, half of the energy has been consumed in the past 20 years or so. That's an astonishing number. We're going the opposite direction. We're going backwards from zero. As for water, everybody saw what happened. This slide's been in this presentation for since 2008. These pictures are from 2007. That's Lake Lanier in Georgia that almost ran dry. It was within 2 weeks of hitting bottom, which meant that the city of Atlanta, one of the wealthiest and one of the largest cities in America, was going to wake up one morning and the taps were going to run dry. In Texas, and I think I heard this right in Doug's lecture, that there are trucks in Chicago now delivering water to Texas. I know that there are many cities in Texas now that are actually having their water delivered by truck There are homes with tanks that are getting a fill up just like gasoline, having it delivered because there is no more water. They're small towns. What happens when this happens to Houston? What happens when it happens to Atlanta? Remember, 2 weeks later, Atlanta's taps would have run dry. This is the Colorado River. Does anybody know where this is? That's also the Colorado River, just before it hits the Gulf of California. That is the Colorado River Delta, one of the world's great rivers. We drain it dry before it hits its source. Not only have we destroyed the ecosystem of this delta, but we've drained one of the world's great rivers that 30 million people live off of. This is a helicopter view of that same little rowboat that's just abandoned there. It's now in the middle of the desert. But we can talk about the Yangtze, the Ganges, the Yellow River, the Niger, every one of the great rivers that you ever read about in your history books. The same thing is happening. They're drying up before they hit their deltas. Boats can't go through this river in China anymore, through the Yellow River. So now, here's the challenge. We've got 130 million homes in America. Half of them were built before 1975. We've got buildings that are consuming half of the energy in the US. 22% of that is from our homes. So places like California are saying, well, all new homes by the year 2020, ambitious goal. And they're still arguing whether or not they're going to be able to do this, but I think we know they can. It's just a matter of the willpower to do it. Net zero energy by 2020. So I have a question for all, everybody's engineers, architects, what is everybody? How many engineers? Architects? All right, so half engineers, half architects in this room. I'm assuming math is part of this. So I'm going to ask this question, see how many of y'all get this right. If all new buildings, starting today, all new buildings built on the planet are built to net zero energy, starting this afternoon, they never consume, no new buildings ever consume any more carbon. How much will that reduce our number and get us closer to zero emissions? How much? Zero. So what we need to focus on is the existing stock of buildings. Specifically the existing housing stock, because that's where so much of this comes from. And frankly, it's easy to do, and it hurts our economy if we don't, because so much of our energy, so much of our dollars go towards energy. In Michigan, 80 cents of every energy dollar leaves the state. So in Greenbuild, they should be addressing this, right? Well, I lectured there last year. I'll be lecturing there again this year in San Francisco. And so I went back and I looked and I said, well, how many sessions have there been? Well, there's been over 1,000 lectures in 10 years of Greenbuild. How many of them were about existing buildings, including mine? 3 of them were last year. 13 sessions about existing buildings. Not just net zero, just about existing buildings, period. So, but can we really do this? And like I said earlier, that if Amory Lovin said that if it exists, it must be possible. So let me show you what exists here. This is what's possible. Oh, I didn't update you the numbers, but they're very close to this. Oh, actually, no, they're not. They're way beyond this now. We're actually, this number has actually gone down. We've actually implemented a couple of other new energy-saving things that we do not need to change our behavior. This number has come down. We're at about 7,100 kilowatt hours. This number over here has gone up because last year was a very bad solar year. So we're approaching 10 megawatts a year, 10,000 kilowatt hours a year. So we have about 2,300, 2,500 kilowatt hours extra that we're producing. So this is for the super nerds in the room who love numbers like this. That's about 31 million BTUs. That includes, we still do have a gas stove. We'll talk about that in a minute. And about 24 kBTUs per square foot. The reason this number is so important is because I believe that is the magic zone. If you look at any building, NREL has a building out in California, a huge office building, tens of thousands of square feet, parking lot included, lighting in the parking lot. Lights are never on during the day. And they have motion sensors at night. So they're only on when they're serving a purpose in that parking lot. So the parking lot and the entire facility are net zero energy. kBTUs per square foot are in this range of like between 15 to 30. In fact, I don't know if anybody that's hit it with 30 kBTUs, but that seems to be this magic number that I just want everybody to start paying attention to. So here's our energy bill that we just got. So this was September 14th. So we're at negative 651 for the year. And a lot of that actually goes because we still have this gas stove. So we've got this Mishcon gas non-residential heating. That's our stove. Just for the privilege of having a stove that burns 3 pilot lights 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, we have to pay $14 a month. And the sad thing is I realized that over the past 7 years that we probably could have bought a new stove for the price of that gas. And instead, we're generating excess energy. And so we're at about $88 energy. So now, over 30 years, the life of the average mortgage, how much do families spend? Now, our house was about $2,800 a month, was the cost of the energy in our home. Not including the car, by the way. Cars are a whole different story. So at 4% interest, all right, very, very conservative when we're talking about energy, because energy does not go at the same price as inflation. But let's say that $167,000 over 30 years. But we all know that what comes up must come down, right? But no, that's not true. So over these years, it's gone up about 40% since 2004. Gasoline prices go up 5–10% in a day. So if we look at these real numbers, what's happened? We've eliminated our energy bill. So over 30 years, at 7% interest, which is what a lot of folks are saying could happen with energy. If we stay the course, we're talking about $263,000 over the life of our mortgage. That's more than we paid for the house. The renewable energy credits will give us about $20,000 over a 20-year period, because then they expire after that. So we were talking about a $283,000 swing. Now, if we want to be really conservative and just go with 5.5% inflation, we're still looking at $214,000 plus $20,000. So this is a guy I just met at a cocktail party who thought this was a really stupid idea. But so the solution to all these things is really just it's a really simple formula. It's calories in, calories out, energy in, energy out. That's it. That's what net zero energy is. So the formula is you lose less, you use less, and then you produce. It's that simple. So, for engineers, it's really, the first thing to do is, correct the load rather than just trying to get a bigger ass, which is part of the problem a lot of times. So the first thing we did was keep score, is really start doing the math. How much are we consuming? What are we consuming it for? Is each one of those things actually giving us benefit? I have what I call the UP score, the usefulness percentage. If a light is on in an unoccupied room, those lights are on in the hallway right now. First, the hallway is unoccupied. Second, when someone passes through it, there's already plenty of light from the sun coming into that hallway. Those lights have a usefulness score of 0. The ratio for what we have to pay for the energy it's 100%. We have to pay 100% of the cost, and we get 0 benefit. That's bad. We want to flip that model on its head. So this is actually today when I was sitting in the lecture earlier this morning. I pulled this up. This is a screen from our house. Totally overcast day. Our entire house was consuming 123 watts. About 20 of that is actually just to run the modem and all the other stuff so that I can see this data. And that runs 24/7. And we were still producing about 1,300 watts. And sending energy back to the grid on an overcast day here in Michigan. So one of my heroes is a sustainability expert in Singapore, Liang Lok. He talks about eating the feet, that anything that uses energy must be challenged. Everything. So it's should be like Chinese cooking, that you use everything, eat the feet. All right? And that's the same thing when you're building a solar decathlon house. Every single thing that is consuming energy has to be questioned. Everything. You have to question the benefit, question its usefulness, and then question how we can get that not only to a 1-to-1 ratio, but in some cases we can even have a positive ratio. With geothermal, Geothermal, you take 1 unit of energy from the sun in our house, and I turn it into 5 units of benefit because I'm getting the rest of that energy from the ground. So I'm getting 5 times the BTUs that are going to make me comfortable as I am in energy that is getting. So now my score is 500%, my up score. So let's take a look at lighting again. So the cost versus price, these are things that people constantly miss. And I've seen a lot of these design competitions and in homes that are actually built that spend a lot of money, millions of dollars sometimes for these homes. And they get these really sexy engineering things in there, and they've got teams of engineers and designers, and they're looking, well, we can't do that. That's too expensive. And they're not really looking at what the cost of certain items are. Why everybody isn't doing motion sensors and LED lights at this point is beyond me. But here's why. Because they look at the price and they say, well, I can get an incandescent light bulb, used to be able to, for $1. I can get a decent compact fluorescent that won't be dimmable and has filled with mercury for $5, and it's going to cost me $25 for an LED. This is Home Depot prices, retail, off the shelf. Here's what you're going to spend over the life of the bulbs. You're going to have to buy 23 bulbs. You're going to spend over $200. Again, that's today's energy cost. The compact fluorescent, you're going to have to buy almost 4 bulbs over the lifespan, and you're going to be spending $70, including the cost of energy. And this bulb right here, including the cost of energy, is only going to cost $58 over the life. So right now, today, this is the cheapest light bulb. These prices are coming down every other month. Every other month. A year ago, that bulb was $80. Now it's $25. It's already the cheapest one. And of course, that's what I call the 8-track cassette of lighting. The best light, though, like Doug was just talking about in his lecture, is natural daylight, right? That's the best quality light that we can get. So everywhere we go, we should be trying to capture that light. Old homes recognize that. So there may have been a light bulb in every room in this house when it was built. But during the day, they didn't turn that on. They used that only at night, and they only had the light on in the room that they were using. When we moved into the house, the woman we bought the house from, Gert Gauss, who was actually born in this living room, she was this daughter of Elizabeth and Philip Gauss, who you saw those pictures of earlier. She was actually born in this parlor right here. She had covered all the blind with these floor-to-ceiling blinds, and there was no daylight in there. She was just flipping out. She grew up in the 1950s, really, and when you just mechanized everything. So water. Why do I have water in the part about energy here? We're totally getting screwed in the shower, every one of us. 2.5 gallons a minute is the federal standard, the maximum that a shower head is allowed to flow. 2.5 gallons through the tube every minute. Every minute. There are plenty of shower heads out there now that use 1.5 gallons per minute, hours. That's for a family, an average family, that's almost 16,000 gallons of water every single year. It's hot water. Hot water. One of the most energy-consuming things in the house is the hot water, is the water heater. And we're wasting at least 1 gallon every minute. That is the best payback of energy, any energy device in your house is the shower head. Why these aren't mandatory is beyond me, and why people don't do it is beyond me. Appliances. Every appliance has to be the most efficient appliance. And that's our actual stove right there. It's a Magic Chef from 1969. It was installed. We have the original manual, which we're going to frame and keep in the kitchen. As I said, 3 pilot lights, 24/7. If you left a bar of chocolate right there, by the time you woke up in the morning, it would just be melted all over the thing. That's how much heat it's wasting. So we're actually going to be switching this out to a induction cooktop, which is 95% efficient. Induction cooktops will release a whole lot less heat, so therefore the energy you're getting in the food has a greater usefulness percentage. And then now the most exciting thing is last year, I guess it was last fall, or no, last summer, My Ford magazine was out there before the Ford Focus came out, and we were thinking someday we're going to have an electric car. We're going to be able to plug it into that into those solar panels at our house, and we will be the all-American family. And that someday was a few weeks ago, and that's our brand new Chevy Volt. Don't tell Ford. Because they actually put us again in this summer's edition of the magazine. They had that photograph, they reran that photograph. They're not going to be happy. This is our brand new charging station right here, courtesy of DTE. My daughter is 3 years old, and her favorite thing to do now is to grab that little plug and plug it in. The charger folks have reassured me that you cannot be electrocuted from one of these things, so I let my daughter do it. And it is now powered by the sun. And the cooler thing is, there it is, parked in the parking lot right here at Lawrence Tech. So I drove from Ann Arbor with a tank full of sun, harvested at my house, drove here on all electric, powered by the sun. I plug it in here, powered by DT's charger, powered by coal, and then I will drive it back home, and I will use 0 gasoline. So once you guys have solar panels on that charging station, I can go round trip on current solar income, rather than solar energy that has been stored in the ground for thousands and thousands of millennia. I can live off current solar income rather than borrowing from the geological bank account that is running dry. So now when going back makes sense. Our house also had a root cellar in it. There is a return of the root cellar. There's some pretty exciting things, like why use any energy whatsoever? But we do have technology now that can control the humidity in these things. So we can actually design a better root cellar using a fraction of the energy that we use now for a refrigerator. Do we go back to the icebox? Probably not. But really what this was is they used just a phase change material, ice. So why not use a smarter phase change material? So there's these folks at the University of Mexico, and I think Berkeley or Caltech, teamed up to redesign the refrigerator. And what they decided was that, hey, what if we took a phase change material and we ran the compressor once every day to freeze the material, and then treated it like an icebox, and then just did the heat exchange across that, rather than using the heat exchange or the ambient temperature of a tube with coolant that's running a compressor every time the temperature drops. I can keep the temperature the same until the phase change material is expired. Well, they calculated that they could take a phase change material that would have a 24-hour cycle to it, and they could run that refrigerator compressor once a day. That's astonishing. Again, one of the most energy-consuming things in the house is the refrigerator. We can rethink that. We can bring the icebox back. We can bring the root cellar back using the technology that we have now. Now combine this with a heat pump, and now we're talking real energy savings. We're talking a heat pump that can, it always astonished me. Wait, it's 5 degrees outside. Why are we using a compressor to freeze our ice cream? It's like, it's 5 degrees outside. Can't we use that air temperature out there and dump our energy into that air? There's some exciting possibilities out there what we can do. Now going back, the best windows ever designed in the history of window making were from the 1850s until the 1920s. There was this period where we made these elegantly designed windows. The problem was they were incredibly leaky. But what we've learned, and all of the data is showing, there's lots of new studies out about this, is that we can seal these windows with the same modern weather stripping as a $15,000 set of Anderson windows, and we can make that nearly as airtight as a modern window. So we were able to add storm windows that were made right here in Southfield, Michigan. A company from the 1920s treated with low-E glass. So we restored the windows. That's my wife out there actually restoring the window, putting in the new sash weights, sash weight cord, putting in weather stripping, bronze weather stripping, a little bit of silicon bulb in the meeting rail and the top and bottom sashes. Restored all the old locks so that they would fit really tightly. And what that ended up happening was that after we put the storm windows and the weather stripping on the window, we achieved an air leakage reduction that was almost to what the new Energy Star 3.0 is requiring for air change in a house. Just by restoring 112-year-old windows using all of that embodied energy. And the materials cost on that was about $400. Hell of a lot of labor, but it's human beings using calories. Again, current solar income. preferably from calories that were grown in our own backyard. Then, of course, we insulate and seal the house really, really well, and I used to brag about how well we did all this, but then I started realizing what I really should be bragging about was how this house doesn't even meet the current energy code for Michigan, and we're still net zero energy. So we have R13 in our walls, dense packed cellulose. What that allowed us to do was to restore the original clapboard siding without using any new material, remove that siding, put the cellulose into the house, fill up that balloon cavity, go up into the attic. Long story about this with the Historic Preservation Office. We're still appealing our historic preservation tax credits, but this is the best thing you can do to a historic home. We sealed this attic incredibly tightly, helped with the air sealing, helped with it, but it's about R30 of insulation up there in the attic, not much, and R13 in the walls, and an insulated sill plate. But what we do is we're able to retain enough of that heat in the wintertime where we're not melting the snow on our roof. And here's our next door neighbor's house. So you can see on the same day, by noon, they've got nothing left on the roof after the night after a snowfall, and they've got ice dams. So they're not only destroying this historic house, but the air conditioner upstairs is keeping them nice and cool though, still. And the light, I never noticed this actually, but the light is still on in the front porch there. So this tiny little house, half the size of ours, consumes probably 6 times as much energy as our house. They're half as comfortable, and they have a utility bill. It's about $2,800 a year. We have a utility bill of 0. We're damn comfortable, and we don't have ice dams. That's a close-up of those ice dams. Then we do, if you'll notice when you see pictures of the solar panels on the south roof there are no protrusions in the roof. We have one protrusion because it's code, because we have this vent stack for sewage pipes. That's the only protrusion in the roof. So we're getting all of our ventilation from this one vent that goes out the back side of the house, which also helps the historic integrity of the house. We don't have the holes all over the place. And we're having a 95% heat exchange with the air that's coming in for the air going out through an energy recovery ventilator. So we're sucking 5-degree air in the wintertime. We're preheating it with the air that's exhausted from the house. Right now, as we speak, part of that 123 watts that we were using is a ventilator that is ventilating our house 24 hours a day. Fresh air coming in all the time. We have very little dust in our house. It's much more pleasant. People with allergies can be in our house. It's much more pleasant. You don't have to worry about CO2. You don't have to worry about moisture, mold, all those other problems that you have. And our house is incredibly well ventilated. So historic preservationists, and I consider myself deeply a historic preservationist, but will tell you that old houses were designed to breathe. And I agree. But they weren't designed to hyperventilate. And that's what old houses do. This can help a house balance and breathe the way it's supposed to. So we also, not only do we look to history to see what we did right, we also look to nature. And what do bunnies know? Well, they know that you use geothermal heat to stay warm. You go into a stable ground temperature. So again, 500% efficiency with the best geothermals that are out there, 30 SEER. If you're not familiar with those numbers, those are very good. They're really high. Smart thermostats. This is the thing that people are missing. So how do you get from 37 HERS rating down to 0? Net zero energy. Smart thermostats, smart control systems, everything, thank you. Smart control systems throughout the house. Making sure that every unit of energy that we are using has some benefit for us. The new smart thermostats are unbelievable. Everyone tells you, look on the DT's website, put in a programmable thermostat. It's like one of the top 3 things after shutting off the water when you're brushing your teeth or shaving, is put in a programmable thermostat. Well, guess what? In 2009, the EPA took away the Energy Star rating from programmable thermostats because they did a study that found that 90% of people had no idea how to program their programmable thermostats. It was designed by the same guy who did the clock on the VCR. So if you're not using them, but what these things know, they know the outdoor temperature, they know the indoor temperature, they know the humidity, they know when you're sleeping, they know when you're awake. And I'm not kidding, they really do. They have these little inexpensive sensors. These are the guys from Apple who left Apple. This was the team who developed the iPod and the iPhone. And they left Apple because they felt like they were just making toys. And they looked around, and one of the owners was building a new house up in Tahoe and said, really? I don't have a choice of thermostats? Why isn't this as smart as an iPhone is? So for $250, every household in America can lower their heating and cooling costs by 20 to 30%. And a lot of companies make these crazy claims, but I'm telling you today, it is absolutely true. We use the ecobee because until this week, the Nest was you couldn't use it with heat pumps like a geothermal system. Now Nest 3.0 has that. This is our house here. I wonder if I've got my little thing here. Y'all are a special group. I don't show this to everybody, but this is the outdoor temperature. This is back from February 3rd. So this is over 3 days in February where the temperature was going up and down. So temperature down here is about 20 degrees. Up here it's about 48 degrees. So you see this big swing. This is the setback temperature in our house. All right. This is the temperature in our house, the green one, the actual indoor air temperature. This one, does it show? Oh, you can't see it because it's too dim on the screen, but it actually shows the humidity level and everything else in the house as well. And pink is stage 1 compressor, dark is stage 2 compressor. Then there's another color for the auxiliary heater, which you do not see here because the auxiliary heater never has to go on. Because you see that every day we have it set back to 60 degrees, but it never gets to 60 degrees in the house. But every day, and this is a timeline, right? So this is 4 a.m. and this was about 5 a.m. and this was about 5:10 a.m. Every day, this thermostat kicked on at a different time because it knew what the temperature was outside. It said, Matt and Kelly and baby Jane are going to get up at 7 a.m. I want it to be 68 degrees when they wake up. Not start getting warmer after they get out of bed, but I want it to be 68 degrees, maximum comfort when they get up. So what this does is it shuts off the compressor, this is the compressor stages, during the coldest parts of the night. So I calculate all of these over time, and it's about 25% less compressor run time during the coldest time of night. So we're talking at least 25% energy savings. Our bills actually during this period went down about 40%. I don't claim 40% because we did have a much warmer winter. So we haven't done a calculation on the heating degree days and stuff. So how much time do we have? We're out. So I'm going to go really quickly. Motion sensored light switches, 60% of the energy is used in unoccupied rooms. Producing stuff, obviously it does work here. We're going to skip all the water stuff. Although this is, no, we won't even talk about that. We won't even talk about water at all. It's a whole other thing. But these are the important things that in over 400,000 years, this was the parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere for over up until 1751, and the 400,000 years prior to that. There should be an extra zero there. 290 parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere. 350 is what James Hansen says, that anything above this level for any sustained period of time, we can't sustain the climate to which we adapted. Can't survive on the planet, basically, for any sustained period of time. 394 is what we hit this year, parts per million in the atmosphere. We are already too high. If everybody takes a deep breath, you will have breathed more CO2, parts per million of atmospheric CO2 than any human being in history. Next year, you'll be able to be proud to hold that record again, and you'll keep breaking that record every single year. That's the trajectory that we're on. So a study was done trying to determine that if all of the countries that attended Copenhagen and made voluntary pledges, if they all met their pledges by 100%, which we all know countries are really good at doing, right? We're really on target for Kyoto and all the other things. These are bad pledges, but let's say they all met their pledges. They tried to determine what the CO2 parts per million would be by the year 2100. That's the number. 500 parts per million is a world with no ice. My daughter will be 92 in the year 2100. We're not talking about some futuristic planet. We're not talking about something far away from here. We're talking about my daughter's lifetime. I was reading a book by James Hansen called Storms of My Grandchildren. It was only halfway through the book that I noticed that his grandchildren were 7 and 8 years old, older than my daughter. We're talking about the storms of my lifetime, of your lifetime. This is something that we need to target zero now. So Bill Bryson, in his most recent book called At Home, he said that the greatest possible irony would be that in our endless quest to fill our lives with comfort and happiness, we created a world that had neither. But if we really do these things, and there's this great cartoon that just came out where the guy's standing up at a climate conference and he says, but what happens if this whole thing is a hoax and we get all these benefits for nothing? What are the benefits of going net zero energy? If we were to harvest all of our own energy right here in Michigan, right here on campus, right in our own homes, harvested our own water, treated our own waste, and living that lifestyle that it would take to achieve all that, we would bike more, we would know our neighbors more, we would shop locally more, we would grow more our own food, we would nurture our own lives at home, and we would genuinely live better and better lives. And we don't want to be asking the question, that's my daughter right there, did I do enough? And saving civilization is not a spectator sport. It's all of us. It's the people in this room. So we have to really redefine the way we think about home. So I don't know if we have time for questions. 2100. 2100, yep. So,
a little gift from us.
Oh, thank you.
For your attendance here, for being here. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Here, I'll come down there.
Come down. Oh, I can come up. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Here.
Yes.